listeners, I'd like to introduce you to Ashley Gates Jansen. She is an interfaith minister, barefoot poet, and a soul friend. She is also a theater artist and former teacher at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. She has extensive experience working with artists, addiction, mental illness, spiritual despair, and personal relationship dynamics. A lifelong learner, Ashley has attended Stephen Jenkinson's Orphan Wisdom School, Richard Rohr's Living School, and Byron Katie's School for the Work. For the past 3 years, Ashley has worked as a volunteer hospital chaplain and has recently completed Francis Weller's grief tender training. Thought Dangerous, her TEDx talk, That Fear Embrace, My Journey with Mental Illness and Mysticism, was taken down and unlisted. Ashley loves road trips, raindrops, wild things, and the unmistakable record needle crackle, surfing the vinyl wave just before an album's opening notes. And with that being said, welcome in, Ashley.
Thank you, Jared. Nice to be here.
Yeah. I love that the unmistakable record needle crackle.
It's just one of the all-time great sounds.
Yeah. I hadn't come to mind until I read it, and then I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, it was a reminder of me when I was a little kid, and my mom had a record player, and I would put on a record, and like I would dance in my living room.
Yeah.
Makes me want to say, those were the good old days.
Good old days. Gosh, I love albums. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your favorite album?
The one I'm listening to. I mean, that's really like,
Let's go.
that's the quick answer. I mean, they're like weather and like colors, you know? What mood are you in? Who do you want to be with now? Yeah.
I love that.
I mean, Fleetwood Mac Rumors was the album for me. 1976. I was 11, and I just listened to it on repeat over and over and over again. Yeah.
The one you're listening to now, that's always I feel a reminder if someone were to ask me. Yeah, because that's like, what's your favorite music? I normally respond by, well, gosh, like it's a whole array, but then to think of, oh, well, the thing I'm listening to right now, it's just an evolution of life.
Yeah.
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 So, Ashley, well, first, let me start off with this because Ashley and I go way back, and yeah, it's a special relationship, and I feel like I need to just send a little bit of a summary of how we met. Ashley and I met originally at so I went to the the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, as well as Ashley. Ashley had went at what year did you go?
I graduated in 94.
94. Okay. And so when I was there, so I went from 2006 to 2010, and I think I saw Ashley around, it might have been in like 2008. And she had come there to do a couple of workshop classes. And I remember the thing I remember is you were a wealth of quotes that like when we first started taking class with you, we would I remember us asking you like more like different quotes, and you always had these like just juicy nuggets of quotes. And um yeah, she had taken us on a lot of different scenarios of connecting us back with our hearts, with ourself, with other people and relationship. And it got me thinking in a completely different way of the external and then within. That was kind of like the almost like a God breadcrumb, just like that meeting Ashley. And then fast forward, um, I had what would be considered like a dark night of the soul. And it was this just like a flash, call Ashley. Um, I was going through a really, really challenging time in my life. And that's what kind of started our just relationship of being friends, of her just giving me wisdom and books and yeah, she just had helped me along in my journey, um, my journey in life. And that's how we met. Um, but for Ashley, so this question is for you, Ashley. Where where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in North Carolina, born in Charlotte, lived there the first uh, 3-ish years of my life.
I did not know that.
Yep. Yep. And then I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you know that I was born and raised in Charlotte?
I remember that now.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
I do.
I was,
How wild is that?
yeah, for some reason I just I that you might have told me, but it never occurred to me. Beautiful. And so what was the first spark for you that you realized that you were a creative or that you were an artist?
Hmm. Well, I don't think I ever had the story that I wasn't.
Hmm.
And when I was 13, my mom, on my 13th birthday, took me and a few friends to see a touring production of A Chorus Line. And when I was watching A Chorus Line, there's a scene where Paul, who's auditioning for the chorus, has a monologue about being dressed in drag and performing like downtown in New York somewhere.
Hmm.
His father coming to where he was and seeing him. Um, and Paul just breaks down in the monologue. He's just sobbing. And my 13-year-old heart and soul were like, oh, that, like on the stage, that is where you get to be really real. That's where you get to be really honest. That's where people tell the truth.
Hmm.
Um, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Hmm. I love that. That's where you get to be really honest. When you, so what was your path that got you to the School of the Arts?
Um, well, of course, I mean, not to sound flippant, I mean this genuinely, my whole life. And uh more kind of, I came to School of the Arts at age 27. So I had gone to the University of Vermont. I had a degree in theater. I had worked in New York City for a couple of Broadway producers. I had come back to Burlington, Vermont, and been a part of a theater company that some friends of mine started.
Mhm.
And I was directing plays. And I felt like, I have some sense, like I would say to an actor, it looks better when you come in from over there than it does when you come in from back there. But I didn't really know why. I didn't really have a craft. I just had a hunch.
Mhm.
And I really wanted a craft. And I started applying to different grad schools. My father lived in Winston-Salem, and my stepmother used to volunteer in the School of Drama. She would drive students to dentist appointments and, haircuts or like whatever they needed.
Mhm.
And they befriended the then Dean of Drama, Gerald Friedman, and his assistant dean, Robert Bessida. And one day when, I don't know, they were sharing a meal or something, and Gerald told my father that he was going to start a directing program.
Oh, cool.
My father said, "Oh my gosh, my daughter is looking for one." And so I came down to Winston-Salem and interviewed and auditioned and applied to School of the Arts.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that your dad had met Gerald. Yeah, for the listeners, I also Gerald was also my dean as well. So I feel like that's like it's really special that that you being in 94 and I still was able to have him as my dean for the 4 years there. Um, so when you so fast forward when you got out of school,
Mhm.
um, and this I feel something is really helpful for listeners too, is to understand what it's like to get out of a school and then to go into following the your creative path or purpose, and then, and this was my experience, like things it's like letting go of expectations, but things can shift and change uh, wildly. And your story of when you got out of school and just that journey of your journey of I I use the phrase dark night of the soul, but sometimes I want to shift the phrasing. But that's just the phrase that comes up to me. But sometimes I'm like, it's like the time of your life where you're actually paying attention to the crevices in your in that are showing up. It's like there's a new awareness that shows up in life. And my question for you is, what was a specific moment where things you had a new awareness and things were not what you thought they were?
Mm. Well, I think, I think there are many. So I'm looking for one to pick.
Hmm.
Um, I would say that after graduating uh, and doing some work in the theater, doing some work on an independent film, coming into a period where I think it was between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the year that I graduated, where I didn't have a job. I wasn't in school. I I wasn't in a relationship. And I was fine during the day, but at night I was incredibly sad, like this deep sorrow
Mm.
was coming up in me. And it's funny because I, like you were saying, I didn't plan for this. This wasn't part of what I thought was going to happen. Um, I ended up being diagnosed with clinical depression, which was um, which was fascinating to me because clinical depression, as I understood it, had to do in part with it, at least in part, with a chemical imbalance. And like I didn't feel like my sadness had anything chemical about it.
Mm.
I couldn't articulate it, but it was a very strong felt sensation. It didn't feel like it was sourced in my brain chemistry. It felt like it was sourced in my soul. Um, but I I ended up going on a trip to Israel. Uh, and I had no religious experience. I went because I heard I could float in the Dead Sea. That was the selling point for me. But while I was in Israel, I was 30 years old. I had a profound um non-consensual reality experience, one for which I was hospitalized and diagnosed mentally ill.
Mm.
And I would call that experience um, initiatory
Mm.
and rough, like a rough initiation, and one that sent me to the underworld. I mean, if we want to talk like mythopoetically, right to the underworld. And what I have learned and continue to learn is that is an essential part of our journey. And initiation is also an essential part of our journey. And it comes unbidden. Like none of us are seeking a dark night of the soul or a dark nights of the soul.
Mm.
Uh, but there are things that can only be experienced and learned and remembered in the dark. Not unlike that indigo card that talked about the starlight
Mm.
in the dark.
Mm. Mm. In that moment, in that time where you were moving, navigating through it all, that experience, um, at what point were at what point did you start to see, I guess in the sense, start to see the star? Something was pulling you towards a place where um, there was love, or yeah, I guess that's the question.
Hmm. Well, first I would say there wasn't any navigating.
Okay.
I mean, it really is a place where like the capacity to navigate is stripped from us. At least it was from me.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of everything that I thought I knew was gone. The fixed stars
Uh-huh.
were no longer there.
Mm.
And I I don't think or feel that at the time, and this was a years long journey, and in some significant ways, it continues, like
Mm.
uh but I would say I didn't recognize the stars in the moment. uh it's almost like looking over my shoulder or looking in the rear view mirror. There they are. I had an experience of I came back to school after I'd gotten out of the hospital. I was hospitalized in Jerusalem, and then I was hospitalized in Philadelphia. And then I was released from the hospital and I came down to School of the Arts, um, to see some friends and see a play. And I came to see Gerald, and he was in his office, and I walked in, and he stood up, and he came over, and he gave me a big hug. And then he looked me in the eyes. He took my hands in his hands, and he looked me in the eyes, and he said, "You'll forgive me for saying this, darling, but you are not manic depressive. You're an artist. And what was given to you in Israel is yours to learn from and to process as only you can, because the experience was given to you." Now, in that moment, I couldn't hear what he was saying. In that moment, I was on probably 6 different medications. My conscious thought was, oh, poor Gerald. Like, he just really, he really lives in this artistic bubble, and the darker aspects of the world don't really penetrate it. And he can't really fathom or conceive of of uh of the state that I'm in.
Mm.
But those words that he said, as you can hear, they got in, and they went very deep somewhere, I'm going to say, in my soul. And they nested and waited until I was able to hear them. And they stay with me to this day.
It was a good seed.
It was a good seed.
Wow.
And
Gosh. Yeah.
the truth, in my experience, um, the truth feels expansive.
Mm.
Lies feel constricting and contract, they're like um limiting. And the truth, we say the truth will set you free. I think the truth helps us remember that we are.
Mm. Yeah, talk about it expansive. Just like even you just saying that out loud just fills my lungs with space. Mm. The truth feels expansive. Lies feel constrictive. Yeah, I resonate with that a lot. Resonate with that a lot. And as I move day to day and keep growing, I've grown in my experience to listen to my body a lot more lately. Um, and I'm trusting more of that expansion and constriction. Yeah. And in the past, I've noticed I can pinpoint those moments of like, the moment when I was constricted, but at the time was not listening. Um, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's why I do my best to remind myself not to believe everything I think. Because I'm so convinced. I'm so convinced that I know.
Oh, that mind.
And there are some truths, that aren't going to feel expansive in the beginning. There are some truths that that can really sting, but they'll sting like hydrogen peroxide in a wound.
Mm,
You
mm,
know,
that's
they're they
good.
they they sting and they've come to help heal.
Yeah. It's that process of hydrogen peroxide. It stings, then it tickles, then it feels a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that analogy. Um, so I would love for you to share um your journey of finding Byron Katie.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this was like 2003-ish, and I was reading O magazine, and there was a piece written by a woman named Martha Beck, and the piece was laugh out loud funny and deeply wise. And I just said to myself, I was like, I got to learn. I got to learn from this woman, like I want to go, who is she and how can I get in the room with her?
Hmm.
And at the bottom of the article was, I don't know if we had websites back then. We must have had something rudimentary like a website.
Uh-huh.
She was a life coach, and
Okay.
she had like a life coach training weekend. And personally, I was like, life coach, I don't know about that, but um I was a minister and a teacher, and and a theater artist, and I was like, whatever I learn I'll use in my ministry and my artistry. So I went to this weekend, and Martha introduced the group of us to the work of Byron Katie. And Katie's work is, it's a method of inquiry that's really a meditation.
Hmm.
And it consists of 4 questions and a turnaround. And Martha gave us um, gave us the opportunity to like experience the work. So you do the work on any stressful thought. And the stressful thoughts, in my experience, can range from, uh, you know, that jerk shouldn't have cut me off on the highway, to my child shouldn't have died.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like there's a whole spectrum of stressful um, and shattering thoughts. So I did the work on the thought my mother should love me unconditionally. And it was profound for me what happened inside of those 4 questions and the turnaround. And the questions themselves are simple. Um, there's no there's no magic to them. The power is in our answers. You know,
Mm,
they're the questions are the simple container. And after having this experience, I realized that I I kind of did the work already, at least a little bit, like with my bipolar diagnosis.
mm,
I was willing to make space for Western medicine's interpretation of my experience. Um, and I did question it. Like I would just say, I'm bipolar. And while I didn't say, is that true? Which is the first question from Katie's work, but I would say, I'm bipolar. And then I would listen for where that landed in my body,
mm,
you know,
mm,
and it just didn't land.
mm,
It just kind of just went all the way down and right back out. And so I thought, I really want to meet this woman. Because I came back and I read her book. I read her first book, which was uh uh what was her first book? I know the second was I Need Your Love. Is that true?
yeah.
Oh, the first book was Byron Katie, Loving What Is.
Tell me what it is. Okay, that was the book that you recommended to me. Gotcha.
Loving What Is. And she was very clear, not accepting what is, loving what is.
Hmm.
That is not easy, my friend.
Hmm.
That is not easy, you know.
Hmm.
And how do you get there? And a lot of us say, well, that's not possible. And we have all these reasons why. And I, was one of those people. So, but I read this book and I was really moved by it and just wanted to meet Byron Katie and thank her. So I emailed. Um, I don't even know how I found an email. It wasn't her personal email, but it got me to the work. And I just said, does Katie ever work? Does Byron Katie ever work individually with people? And I got a response. Um, yes, she does. But she does charge and blah, 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 blah. And I remember going, yeah, I really want to go. So I reached back out, worked it out. I was in Delaware. I went out to California. I was given an address where I would be meeting Katie. I call her Katie now because I've met her a
Mhm.
few times, and um, so please don't hear me be disrespectful. That's really um, how I know her now. But she, it was her home, and I knocked on the door, and I was invited into her home, and we sat on the couch with a cup of tea and listened to music together. And she would say something utterly mind blowing. Uh, that also felt like the truest thing I'd ever heard.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking that she would invite a stranger into her home to me is the signature of the real deal, you know. And Katie is not Katie, like people will say that she's this incredible spiritual teacher, and Katie doesn't pick any of that up in my experience. You know, when I was at her school, which I went to 3 times, twice as a participant and once to serve as staff, she would say, I was a housewife from Barstow, California. That's how I met. That's how I met Katie, and she invited me, you know, she said, come to the school. And so I did. And the first time I went, I was 6.5 months pregnant with my daughter.
Wowie. There's something that came up for me, and um, it's there's a story that I've heard from Byron Katie, and I can't remember if it was you that told me or if it was just something just when I dived into the work. Um, and ever since that story happened, I've I will sometimes contemplate on the moment and then it'll pass. And then there will be like 10 years later or like 5 years later that it comes up again. And every time the same feeling comes up for me. And I'd love to hear your perspective on it and share mine and seeing what comes out of it. But it's this moment where Byron Katie is in a prison. And there is this gentleman who is screaming at her and saying, I'm gonna kill you, and like runs at her. And Byron Katie just stays present. And the guy drops to his knees and just sobs. And when that story showed up for me, the first thing I thought about, and this is actually something that I feel has been imprinted on my soul, or it's just, I've always felt this feeling. But when I heard that story, it just got me, thinking. And so where I'm at right now with this is I don't even know how to I don't even know how to start this because it's kind of there's a weight to it. But I've been having these friends recently, this one gentleman who reads the Quran and asked me what would happen if you had your father that was about to be shot right in front of you. What would you do? And I think back to that moment with Byron Katie, and it was this moment of I wouldn't do anything. I would be in this space of love. I would be love. And then the question would be, well, what if he was shot right in front of you? Well, that would be very, very painful. And of course, these are all hypothetical things, but it's like, it gets me really thinking, like, what would I do? But then there's, this dialogue that comes up about violence and love. And then, well, what about defense? Like, what about defending someone? But I just keep coming back to this moment of like, why would I need to defend love? And that's where I'm left with. And so I would love to just hear your perspective on, I guess it's just like I could never see myself harming somebody or doing that. And I'm curious like where that lies with you.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, is the really honest answer. Like I I surprise myself. I surprise myself by the times that I freeze, and I surprise myself by the times that I um do something. Um it it doesn't, those moments of like high intensity and kind of quick response, I don't feel like I make the decision. I feel like this, like the decision is made through me,
Mm,
you know. Um, yeah. I mean, I think about like uh, you know, um, I know let me think about this for a moment. Yeah, there was an experience. I mean, I was in San Francisco with my best friend, and I had a corgi dog named Sydney. And we were walking down, we were walking on the sidewalk, the and somehow I dropped the leash, and there was a squirrel going across the road or something, and Sydney darted out into the road, and a car was coming,
mm,
and I froze. And my best friend ran out into the middle of the street and put her hand out to stop the car. Uh, I still marvel at it because there was no thought of her safety. There couldn't have been.
mm.
Um, so what am I saying? I'm saying, yeah, there are times when I have spoken up and times when I've stayed quiet. There are times when I've um stepped into the fray of something and times when I haven't.
Mm.
They all feel, I mean, they all feel like some expression of love, or or a call to love, one or the other.
Yeah, you know what? My favorite part about your response is the I don't know aspect.
Yeah.
Because because and it's funny because I actually said the same thing. I was like, I don't know. I really don't know. But like hearing the story about the corgi, it's like, I mean, yeah, the call to love. Um, it's I know where my heart lies. Like I can feel that there's a just a knowing there of where my heart lies. But when that moment happens of whatever it is,
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah.
Well, that was satisfactory.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that.
Yes. Um,
Let me just say that
yes.
Katie shared another story, which was um, uh, she had been she had been held up at an ATM. Uh, a gentleman, I believe it was with a gun, put a gun in her side.
Mm,
And the way that I remember hearing her tell the story, she turned to look at him, and her first thought was, "Oh, sweetheart, I hope you don't do this to yourself."
mm, mm,
And I remember listening to her. She went on to say her second thought was, "Oh, look at that. Look at the way that cloud drifts across the moon." And then she said, "Listen, if this is my death, I'm not going to miss it. I'm not going to miss it by all the voices in my head. Oh my God, he's got a gun. You're going to get killed. Your husband's not going to be able to live without you. Your kids are going to be distraught. It's terrible. It's going to be painful. Ah." She, I mean, I don't know how you get to that place. I don't know if that's a state of grace. Um, what I do know is that I heard it and I wanted to be like that.
yeah.
It's not it's not a surrender. It's not a capitulation. It's not a shrug that says, "Oh well, I guess I'm going to die." There is a deep, I to me, I hear just a deep trust in what is,
Mm,
without me dominating and saying what I think should be.
mm, yeah. Mm.
And thank God we haven't done it my way, because my God, I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. Please, like, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time. So, so having worked with addiction, mental illness, you had mentioned spiritual despair. Um, what what patterns or deeper truths have you seen emerge from those struggles?
Well, for me, this is all about grief and the absence of, and the way that grief has been marginalized, that grief rituals, that communal grief spaces, are so rare, and yet they're the oldest rituals probably that we've ever had. That in the absence of our griefs being witnessed and being shared communally, they get lodged in our bodies, and they calcify, they harden. There is soul loss, there is depression, these ways of trying to cope with the rough initiations, with the shatterings, with the confusion, with the simple griefs that attend the human experience, in the absence of us really honoring and acknowledging and working with grief. People addictions happen, spiritual despair happens. I mean, they are tributaries of the stream of grief that flows into the ocean of great love. We wouldn't grieve if we didn't love.
I remember that moment where I had called you because I was experiencing so much like sorrow, and I was I didn't know what was happening, and this was after a retreat, and I was just like, something's wrong with me, was the thought. Something's wrong with me, that this is like, it's just like so much. And then I called you and I was just explaining to you what was happening. And then you had said, I mean, it was very simple. You just said, Jared, you're grieving. And that was the first time that that made sense to me. Like that was the moment where I was like, the minute that you said that phrase, my body released, or just it allowed it to release. It was, as far as expansion of like the truth that you're grieving, then it was just like, it was like almost like gave me permission to grieve.
Yeah.
But when you said that about the spiritual despair and the rituals and grieving, it opens my mind, and I'm sure for the listeners as well, of just how much that is grieving is. I mean, obviously, like I didn't even know that I was grieving. There's this confusion.
Yeah, well, many of us think that the only grief is death, like the physical death of a loved one. But the bodily death we don't recognize or make space for. I mean, please, the griefs that come with every life transition, from childhood to puberty, there's grief. From puberty into adulthood, there's grief. Adulthood into aging. I mean, I will tell you, as a woman who is 60, menopause is its own grief passage, and death of of the one who was, the ones who came before. We lose a job, we get sick, we get divorced, our child dies, the earth, the losses of language, the extinction of animals, yeah, I mean, grief is it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And grief is deeply tied and connected to our joy, to our sensuality, to our intimacy with the exquisiteness of what it is to be alive. And when we don't grieve, we limit how joyful we can be. And the less we grieve, the less real joy we experience. And that's why so much of our modern society feels like it's flatlined. You know, we don't grieve, but we're sure not ecstatic. You know, we're pretty exhausted.
Yeah. There's this story that popped up in my head as you were speaking. I'm blanking on the title of the book. I think it's like Rain Drops in the Dust or something like that.
The
But
smell
it's
of rain on dust.
yes,
Martine Prechtel.
yes, that's it. There is a story that he's talking about. I think it was his brother who passed, um and he's a American Indian, I believe. I could be wrong. But talking about in their uh ceremony, remembering ceremony around grieving, and or the guy was talking to someone about his, I think it was his brother who passed, and he was scared to what they had been talking about. He was scared to actually fully grieve around the funeral because of how he would be perceived. And um but he decided to grieve anyway, and it was the response was, oh, he needs to get taken to a hospital, to a psych ward, because of the way he's responding to this. Um, and that story just pops up because it's just another awareness of how in society that is perceived when we allow the full um nature of grief to move through us.
Yeah. Yeah. Grief has vitality. Grief can be feral. Grief is not, you can't domesticate grief. And it can be a derangement.
Mm,
We get deranged.
mm,
And those witnessing will be quick to pathologize expressions of grief. And yet there are living cultures that have like professional grievers, professional mourners, people whose job it is to court and invoke the space for the deep, deep grief.
mm,
The keening, the wailing, the, you know, whatever expression our grief takes.
mm. That's that's so interesting because I think of this just made me think of in weddings to allow people to uh feel that experience of joy. They have dancers that are really moving their bodies. And it's what I think about when people are sent there to be to be the space of grief or hold the space of grief. It gives people permission to to then be in that space of oh, they're doing it so I don't feel as weird or strange that I can do that as well.
Yes, because expressions of grief have been kept from us. Imagine if we grew up in communal grief spaces, hearing other people, older people express, then the sounds are recognizable and understandable. But right now, so many of us we're terrified of our grief. We have a fear of grief.
Mm. Something popped up and I'm figuring out how I want to word it, but the word psychosis comes up, and I think that it's like something that is a natural thing, but then okay, so for instance, like here's an example of when I was having my experience of the dark night of the soul, and then I reached out to you to help me along, I do remember this moment where what I felt was so real of just intuitive, it just felt intuitive of me moving on from that relationship. And then the reflection back was, you are crazy. Um, that moment of actually letting that external convince me or convince whatever was happening that, oh, must be going crazy. And my question, okay, so my question is, people that are deemed as schizophrenic, um, it makes me wonder was there this moment where they were actually feeling so alive, but then the external world told them otherwise and they let that be their belief. There's just I don't even know where I'm going with this, but there's something about my curiosity is leading me in this place of schizophrenics and people in psych wards. Um, where it's like it makes me wonder about this world of schizophrenia and mental illness and things of that nature. I don't know if there's a question there, but I guess just something I felt or noticed.
Well, I certainly can't speak to the to all experiences
Sure.
that are diagnosed as psychotic. I can share in my own experience where I was where it was said that I was floridly psychotic. Floridly, like blue, literally the language is a blooming psychosis.
Well,
Uh, Years later, I encountered a West African elder, his name is Malidoma Some. And there was an article about him, very Googleable, if any of your readers are interested. And it's called What a Shaman Sees in a Mental Hospital.
mm,
And Malidoma, who is from Burkina Faso, uh, went to a mental hospital, and he was shocked by what he saw. patients who were like, really, really medicated, some just very, very what we would call sick, whether they're just rocking back and forth or screaming or banging their heads or whatever they're doing. And and for him, he said that in his tribe, the Dagara tribe, when a person in the village presents with the very same symptoms that we in the West see as psychotic, his tribe recognizes those very same symptoms and sees them as signifying the birth of a healer. The tribe makes space for that one. They know that what is happening to that one is happening for all of them. And that one has a foot in two worlds. And they make space. Now, what I will say is I have had experiences being in the presence of people who were manic, who were said to be in some kind of manic or state. And a couple of the things that I have witnessed in some is that there is a direct relationship to a traumatic event. And the traumatic event is seeking to be known consciously, but the individual it's not the individuals to find by themselves. And so in the absence of the holding by one's village or by one's beloved community, we're trying to do it ourselves. And it's amazing what happens when we are witnessed without our expression being problematic for the one witnessing. So we talk like this this is one of the things that we say about people with Alzheimer's. We say, now we're saying, don't correct them. Don't tell them that they're wrong. Join them. It's like an improv. You go to visit your grandmother and she says, "Oh my God, there's so many, these monkeys are flying all over the room. There's so many monkeys." And instead of saying, no, Grandma, there are no, look again, there are no monkeys, right? You join. "I can't believe those monkeys are here again, Grandma. I wonder what they want."
Whoa. Wow.
Like I heard a story that went along those lines, and this gentleman like joined his mother where she was. And after a few minutes, she turned to him and she said, "Oh, don't be silly. There aren't any monkeys." Like we just don't know where it will take us. We
Yes.
stop thinking that we know everything all the time.
Wow.
With the dying, the actively dying, when they start to, speak to an ancestor who's been dead, and we say, "Oh, they're hallucinating." Are they, or are we? Like they clearly see somebody. I just think that we need to bring some spaciousness and a willingness to be in relationship with a mystery that we cannot know. Malidoma, in his tribe, they have a word. I can't remember. I would say it if I could remember it, but its definition is the mystery that knowledge cannot eat. The mystery that knowledge cannot eat, that which the mind, our certainty, cannot domesticate, cannot control, cannot know. And I find that a place that I can rest. And I didn't always. That could have been a place of a lot of anxiety.
Mm. Oh, yeah, there's no words, but I definitely felt a lot you sharing that. Yeah, I felt a lot of like just like tingles all through my body. Makes me think of just, my grandmother had passed from just on like before passing dementia. That was happening, but then I think back and wonder about the conversations to be had of just playing with what's happening. Because in a sense, it's like, who knows? They could be from a past trauma that they haven't gotten past, and it was through talking with them in that moment, you're helping them have, I don't know, bring space to it.
Yeah. 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 And the world is the earth, I think, anyway, is more practically magical and alive than many of us are able to perceive,
Mm,
you know? And I think this is in part where some of the uh, psychedelic therapy
mm,
can be helpful. You know, what the plants can help us remember. And again, um, like anything, there are set and setting, there are experiences that can be so beautiful and then some that can be really harmful. So
mm, mm.
I'm not here making any blanket statements or broadcasting any universal truths. I'm really speaking uh personally. That's all I got. All I got, you know.
Yeah, that's all you got. A lot you got a
Got a lot.
lot.
Got a lot.
Um, so you you worked with Stephen Jenkinson. Um, and I was just curious, uh, what you learned there with Stephen Jenkinson, or what was the core of what you learned there, and then also what was the most beneficial thing that you took from it?
A couple of things. and one is the way that we seek to distill an experience, like what was the takeaway? What was the nugget?
Mm-hmm.
The takeaway and the nugget were you can't distill it down to a takeaway and a nugget. It's it's yeah, I got to Stephen because there's a documentary about him called Grief Walker.
Okay.
Um, there's the trailer is on YouTube,
Okay.
and uh, when I watched the trailer, I never heard anyone talk about death and dying the way that he did, and I was riveted like a jackrabbit. Um, and I went and heard him speak in North Carolina. And the way that he spoke, the eloquence, the language, his languaging of things was deeply moving to me. And I got on the wait list for the Orphan Wisdom School. And when there was space for me, I went. Um, and sorry about that. Uh, and what, one of the things that I cherish the most are some of the people that I met there.
Mm.
Um, we had 4 sessions over almost 2 years, and there is a group that to this day, we meet every other Sunday on Zoom. We just show up, and whatever we want to talk about, we start talking about, just checking in with each other. Um, and these people were there for me in an important way. When my father died, and my father died in December of 2021. Today is actually his birthday.
Oh, wow.
Um, and just to have people who made space, who didn't want me to be strong, the way we sometimes say, oh, her father died and she's just so strong. Look at her. Isn't she incredible? You know? Yeah, Stephen wrote a book called Die Wise.
Advice.
And again, it's a big book and full of stories.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think, I've been looking for elders, for people, who have learned some things and who are remembering. And Stephen would say grief is not just an emotion, grief is a skill.
Mm.
And our capacity to grieve and and craft from that grief medicine for our people, nourishment for our people. I know that some of the things that I grieve the most deeply, without being swept away by them, the clarity that I have because of the grief helps me show up for others in in a way that I can that I'm doing my best to ensure that they are spared of that particular grief to the
Mm,
best of my ability,
mm,
you know.
mm.
I sometimes say um out of our grief, the grace to give what we did not receive.
The grace to give what we did not receive. Mm,
Said another way, there's an expression that says if you're hungry, become bread. And and for me, that longing to belong, that like intense, deep longing in me to really be seen and really be known and really belong has given me the I I think it's given me the capacity to be a place of belonging for others, to give to
mm.
others what I would have loved to have so yeah, what I would have loved to have received.
This makes me want to talk to you about being a hospital chaplain. Um, what is a hospital chaplain?
Well, in my experience, uh, I I am there to reverently acknowledge the patient's experience. I'm there I'm there to listen. I'm not there to um, bring any kind of agenda or preach any kind of dogma. I'm I am there uh, in service to the patient and their experience, and to let them know that they genuinely matter and that their experience matters. And you know, there are times when I'm invited into that room and patients tell me the things they've never told anyone.
Mm.
And it is humbling, it is heartbreaking, it is sometimes hilarious, tender, touching, beautiful. I say everything that's wrong in the world can show up in a hospital room, and so can everything that's right.
This is the most silence that I've had on podcasts, and I just love it, and it feels required.
Yeah, it's important. And uh I we tell the story that silences are awkward or silences are scary. No, the silences are not scary or awkward. The story that we tell about this
Mhm.
is one of awkwardness or fear, you know? Silence is sanctuary. Silence is rest. Silence is, that's how the music gets made, you know? The space between the notes.
Say it to the back. That's good.
I mean, you and your listeners have probably heard this before. Um, but I remember the cultural anthropologist Angeles Arian. She studied different um, cultures and the ways of the medicine men and medicine women of the different tribes. And when someone when someone presented themselves to the medicine people, presenting with something that we would probably call depression, Angeles Arian really saw that there were these four questions that seemed to come up again and again, in general through these different cultures. And the first question was, when did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? When did you become disenchanted with stories, especially your own? And when did you become uncomfortable in the sweet territory of silence?
That is that is a, absolutely a beautiful way to bring you back to presence.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking right now, ooh, that's a nice little nugget for me as far as the silence aspect. Like, oh, what's happening? What's happening when you're all of a sudden you're like this new phrase that's going around right now, doom scrolling,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where from the silence, uncomfortability and doom scrolling shows up.
Yeah. Well, and we want to just notice the ways that we distract from our grief. Like embedded in the question, when did you stop singing? Is, you know, tell me about that grief. Tell me what happened. What happened? What broke your heart? What 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 shocked you? What made you numb? Where'd you go? And again, like the heavy lifting is, we're just not meant to do it alone. Grief work is the solitary work that we cannot do alone.
Mm, mm.
And that's another teacher of mine, Francis Weller.
Yeah. And that's fresh for you. You just finished.
I finished the grief tender facilitation last year, yeah.
Hmm.
And then I read Francis's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, probably in like 2018, maybe,
Mm.
and was trying to get to one of his grief rituals and, but it was very hard. And then COVID hit, and one of the gifts that came from that was that his work came online. So I was able to be in weekend long workshops with him on Zoom. And my first experiences of shared grief were in breakout rooms with like 4 or 5 of us on Zoom. And it was amazing
Wow.
because it would be me in Pennsylvania and someone in the Netherlands and someone in California and someone in Ohio. And
Mm.
I would think, this is never going to work online. But I tell you what, don't believe everything you think, Ash, because it sure did.
Wow. Wow. Who would have thought?
Right?
Breakout rooms, Zoom.
Truly.
Yeah.
Those little boxes, you know?
Yeah. That's and I appreciate you sharing that story too, because it's like I too have been in the space of like, I'll get that resistance to like, and like for instance, a Zoom room, but then leaning into the curiosity and the, yeah, connection and community. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a few more questions for you. Um, what does the hero's journey mean to you?
Pregnancy and birth are the feel to me like the original hero's journey. And I wouldn't use that much. Like I wouldn't say hero, but
Uh-huh.
um, but that that journey. Um, talk about initiatory.
Hmm.
Talk about an initiation, pregnancy and birth. Talk about not being able to control an experience, not being able to know an experience, and having an experience that may well take one to the brink of what they think they can endure, take them right into what feels like a very real encounter with death. Um, yeah. And of course, we're we're we've medicalized birth and death. That's another podcast interview, my friend.
Yeah, right.
um, and and
Mm,
and not with me. I have, but I know with whom. I know some
mm,
people
mm.
who could speak to it
Please do share.
more beautifully.
Yeah, later I'll text you on that.
Yeah.
Um, what word
I, I
mhm.
would say, I'll just say, along with the hero's journey, I read a book by, I want to say, Jean Houston, maybe, and it was called The Wizard of Us.
Oh, that's a great title.
And it's about what the hero's journey looks like through the feminine, which is basically Dorothy.
Um,
and that and that that hero's journey is is different than, there's like Star Wars and there's the Wizard of Oz, right?
yes, yes.
um yeah, yeah. I think for me, the naming of the journey comes in the wake of what is lived. Like if I know, oh, this is me and I'm in the hero's journey, and this is the stage of severance. Like if I know all that, I'm not really fully able to participate in it. You know, this as an actor, like if you know what's going to happen in the scene, and of course, but you can't know, because if you do, nothing happens.
Mm,
A lot of technique, but not a lot of soul.
that's really good. It's so funny. I was like, what would be another word to use rather than the hero? And then I literally just like soul,
Mm.
soul's journey,
Mm.
something yeah, but I like, um, so right before, we got on, I, and I asked this question to on every episode. But I like to just ask, like, okay, God, creator, what is the age that I want to ask this question to of Ashley? What age would I ask? And the age that came up was 25.
Mhm.
Um, and so if you had one piece of advice to give to your 25-year-old about your soul's journey, what advice would you give?
It's not going to be what you think, and you can trust all of it.
Amen. And that would be a great advice to give to any of the lesson listeners too. It's not going to be what you think. Trust all of it. Ashley, thank you.
Such a pleasure and a joy, Jared. Really, really good talking with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And is there anything, if is there any place, if for any listeners that would want to find you, is there any place that you wanted to share with them?
Um, well, I don't have a website. Da,
Mhm.
da, da. But I do have an email.
Yeah,
Ash Jansen, Jansen at mac.com.
beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, and just for the listeners, her email newsletter, Ash
Oh, Ash
Wednesday,
Wednesday.
um is is great. And it's so good. And I love from just me personally, my experience of it is it just gives you how can I say this in a short phrase? It gives you just beautiful paintings of different aspects of, or just different aspects of life. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I will say to the listeners, thank you so much for listening to this conversation, and stay tuned for the next episode.